I posted example called DiceRollerService, a Java Spring Boot example. And this is the last example in the first half of the course. And it is designed to be as a link from first half of the course to second half of the course. It is reusing some of the code from previous example DiceRoller, but it is using it totally different way. So this is why it's kind of link between two parts of the course. It is also using some JavaScript and some jQuery. I assume that you have some familiarity with jQuery, but it's not essential. I will quickly explain things that I use from jQuery. I use only very little specific things. So let's clone this example, and this example is introduction to the second half of the course. It will take about 1 hour to explain, slightly less, so we're in good timing. So I click it and I clone it. Code, copy, and get from version control, Control V, DiceRollerService, and clone it. Trust project. You could probably guess from the name of it, it's again about rolling dice. But this program is written very differently from previous one, although it behaves exactly the same. There is some duplication of the code for the server side, but it also has client. It does have JavaScript now. So it did build. So let's run this code to see what it's doing. So I click run. It's starting and started, so I can go to localhost 8080. And it shows no dice rolling, right? Now, if I click total 0, number of dice selected 3 by default, so I can say keep it 3, select to 4, and I click roll, now we have 4. If I close this tab or reload this page, go to close browser and go back to localhost 8080, it will remember this value. So you can experiment, you can close browser, come back, and it will remember this value. And it's not done with cookie. There is no cookie in this program. In fact, cookie is not even mentioned in this code. But it is done separately. Control-Shift-I stands for inspection. If you click on cookies, you will see that it has probably, no, it doesn't even have, because I closed the browser during break. If I wouldn't close browser during break, it would have session ID cookie from previous running program. It would have session ID cookie from student data too. But since I closed browser during break, it removed session ID cookie from that program. But what do I have? I have local storage, and if I click local storage, it has the data. 6216. And this data will survive closing the browser. Okay. And it is updated each time when I run it. So I want to move it outside. So it's a separate window. So it's not closing this. So each time when I update it, it is updating this one of 4535, 4535, right? Okay. As you notice, there is a local storage and there is a session storage. They behave exactly the same, except session storage will be wiped out when you close the browser. But local storage will survive. We didn't use local storage so far. It is the first time in this course when I use local storage. What is the reason? There is a very good reason why I didn't use local storage. Because local storage is available only to JavaScript. We didn't have JavaScript in our programs, use it in any intelligent way except like inserting footer. This is why we didn't use local storage, because it is available only to JavaScript. It's not traveling through cookie, it's not traveling through requests. The only way to access it is to force your JavaScript to send you the data. Okay. This is why it's called local storage. It is local. It is more convenient than cookie. If you want to store something specific with JavaScript that will survive closing the browser or survive reload button. See, if I click reload, you see it still survived. You know, when you click reload, browser will reload everything. If it was running JavaScript, JavaScript will be clear it out and restart it, right? It means this cannot be stored in the variable. This variable will be lost if you click reload button. So for this reason, it is stored in local storage. If you click reload, it will be still the same. Okay? So another reason why it is local storage. A reload button will not destroy the data. And this data is not on the server at this moment. It is in the browser. So what is on the server right now? So let's open server code and get familiar with it. Before I dive into the code, I will quickly tell how I created this project. When I created the project, I selected new project as usual, and it is Spring Initializer. I gave it some name, so I replaced it name, 1717 next. And out of the list, I selected only one piece, Spring Web Services, only this. I didn't select Spring Web, I didn't select template because it is not used. Its only piece was selected as Spring Web Services. Okay? So I click cancel. And in build Gradle file, as a result, I have only one library, starter web services. Okay? And the test is included by default. So let's see what do we have now. In main, I copy-pasted service path from previous dice roller. So what is here? I have some service defined as interface that gives me raw data. Get raw data for number of dice is giving raw data. What is implementation? It doesn't matter. It is some code that is giving raw data. And what is raw data? It is interface implemented by some class that contains list of integers, number of dice, and what is total. All right? So it is exactly the same code as in previous lesson, so I'm not re-explaining it. Okay? So service, it is something that is generating raw data, and raw data, it is wrapper object that contains list of integers, number of dice, and total. Okay. I do have controller now, as before, but this controller is not defined as add controller. This controller is different. It is defined as REST controller, add REST controller. So I have additional word REST here. Okay. So this is a difference because it is RESTful service. Next, I have additional folder similar to student data folders. It is virtual folder, so addresses I mapped below will be inside of the folder API. Right? Inside of the controller, I have a declaration of constructor that requires given service. So when system is creating controller class, it will call constructor of the implementation of the service, and this is DiceRollerService implementation, this implementation of the service interface. But since it's market service, it means it is injectable, call the constructor of it to inject where it is necessary. It is the same code as before. And it will be injected into controller as usual and assign it to local value, to instance variable of the controller. So I can get raw data each time when I call methods of it get raw data. So far it is similar, right? Next, I have a method, raw dice, map it to raw dice in this virtual folder. So the actual address of this method, it is API/raw dice. Previously, we had methods that were returning strings, and if it returns string, it would be template name. Or we had the method returning model and view. And model of view, it's a wrapper object that contains template name and the data to be inserted inside of template, right? Model data. In this case, it is neither of the two. It is just data object, raw data, right? Just raw data object. Why? Because it's not controller. It is REST controller. It is different kind of controller, right? Next. What happens inside? I have request parameter, which is by default 3, and if you do not provide 3, if you do not provide value, it would be 3. If you do provide value, it will be the value that you provide. So this is the same. I don't have a request parameter is rolled because if request comes, it just assumes that it is rolled. So what is inside? I'm generating raw data. So if number of dice is in the range between 0 and 5, I'm just calling dice roller get raw data for number of dice. If it is outside of the range, I'm just calling this for 3. So primitive validation. If it's out of range, it is 3. And this method is just returning object that contains raw data, nothing else, for given address. All right? So let's see. It is running now. So let's go to that address. So what was the address? Localhost /API /roll dice. So let's go to that address. Localhost 8080 /API /roll dice. Press enter. And remember that by default it was 3. So this is what is coming from the controller. Data. So it's a data from the object that we returned, right? And since it is by default 3, and it takes other numbers, so we can change it to number of dice, for example, 5. And now it is for 5. Right? So in this case, controller is not returning template. It is returning just the data. This data format is called JSON. A JSON in capital letter JSON, it is acronym that means a JavaScript object notation. JSON, a JavaScript object notation. Why is it called JavaScript object notation? In JavaScript, if you highlight this piece and assign it to the variable, this variable will refer to valid object. So this is actually assignable to the variable, and this will be valid JavaScript object. In JavaScript, when you use it inside of, assign it to variable or just inside of JavaScript, quotations around field names are optional. If field names have like variable names, good. If field names contains characters that makes it invalid variable names, for example, contains space or minus or plus, it has to be quoted, but it would be still valid object. Okay. So in this case, quotes will be, if instead of values, I will type dice values with space in between, I would have to use quotes, because otherwise it won't be interpreted as field name or variable name. If it has dash in it, like dice dash values, also valid, but it cannot be used outside of quotes, because this way minus will be taken as minus. All right? So a part for quotation that is optional for good names, it is a valid JavaScript object. What kind of data can be contained in the fields for this object notation? Obviously, it could be array, not array of just numbers, it could be array of other objects. It could be Boolean, true, false, could be string. If it is string, it should be quote. Also, arrays could be containing objects, and objects could be containing arrays. So just because you can nest objects inside of an object and objects inside of arrays, combination can be very fancy. So potentially, data could be long. Key point, JavaScript object notation, it is object one, singular. JSON can contain only one object. You cannot put more than one separate object. But you can have a nested objects. It means JSON data must start either from curly brace or from square bracket. If it starts with curly brace, it means regular object, and it will end with curly brace. If JSON starts with square bracket right here, it would be array of something, and array of something should end with square bracket because it is array. So JSON may look like starting with curly brace or starting with square bracket. So this is what we need to know about JSON. Okay? So data potentially can be fancy and long because you can nest strings. And also you can use strings, and any data can be converted into strings. So potentially it can contain binaries converted to strings. So it can go fancy. So you already realize where it's coming from. It is coming from the controller here. If we need just RESTful service, this is the entire program. And this RESTful service can be picked by some client, for example, Android client or iOS client. Right? In this case, I coded client right in this same project, but client lives separate life in this case. Where is my client? I have resources, static, and in my static folder, I have index file, index.html, served by the same server by default. So if you have index.html file in static, it will be associated with default address /. This is what you see when we go to here, right? Default address /. It is index.html that is running some JavaScript inside of index.html. So what you see here, index.html file. So let's open index.html file here and check what is inside. I have a CSS files for main and for footer, and I am using jQuery to update screen. And I have main.js, it is my JavaScript that is updating the screen. So my client is this one. And server, you already saw, it is serving just data when client is sending request. When does it send request? When you click this, it is sending request, right? Otherwise, it's just showing previously saved data in local storage, right? So if I click reload, browser will send request for new HTML file, right? But client is not really sending any request. Client is just grabbing data from local storage. So what do I have here? Main.js presented as module. Not regular JavaScript file, but module. So what is a module? I assume that it was either mentioned or not mentioned, but somehow good to know. So what is module? You can separate your JavaScript code into several files, and this way they are modules. And it is a nice way to organize code because modules hide defined values from outside one point of view, so you don't run into conflicts. If you organize your code into modules, since modules hide stuff inside, you need to import stuff explicitly and export it from the modules explicitly. So let's see. I open my main.js file, and I'm importing class role data from module, define it in role data.js. If I don't import it into given module, it's not visible. And this class must be also explicitly exported from this module file. Otherwise, it will be hidden. So inside of my modules, I have role data that defines class, which is explicitly exported. Otherwise, it won't be visible outside. This is a good feature of modules, similarly to C# namespaces and similarly to Java packages, to hide names from conflicting. All right. So what do I have here? I define a class with constructor that takes 3 parameters. And when you assign parameter to this something, it will create instance variable in JavaScript. So this is how to create instance variables in JavaScript. They are not declared outside. They're like this, assigned. In JavaScript, class can have only one constructor. It means if I want constructor with different number of arguments, I cannot have it. So I need to go around. So instead of creating another constructor, I'm creating static method, make raw data that is calling constructor from the above. So this make raw data is receiving a list of values, and I calculate sum by rolling for each loop. In JavaScript, I'm running for each loop here. Sum plus value, incremented each time in a loop. So sum will be sum after loop is over. And I'm calling constructor of raw data object by using new. When we call constructor of an object, in JavaScript, it's new keyword. New raw data, values, original values, sum, and length of the array. Right? Length of the array. So I'm calling this constructor. So this is raw data. I will use raw data object inside of my program just to pass it around as object. Okay? Questions? Okay. Next. I also have local storage that's using the dirty work to store the stuff in local storage. So it is also a module, local storage, and it needs to import raw data class because otherwise it won't understand what it is from raw data module. Also, it needs to export some functions. You can export variables, functions, and classes. So in this case, I'm exporting functions. In the previous file, I was exporting class. So what do I export? I export save raw data. Okay. Save, I'm exporting load and is saved, function names. So I save raw data. What does it do? Raw data values, it's a list of items inside of raw data. Okay. What is JSON stringify means? In JavaScript, you can convert any object into string. In order to store data into local storage, it has to be converted into string because local storage takes only strings. So JSON stringify will make a string out of the given object. So what you see here is actual string inside of local storage. JSON stringify, and you assign it to local storage for the given key. Key is local variable for the module, and since it's not exported, it's not visible outside, it cannot go into conflict with other variables. So it is local for given file. Okay, const key. Right? So this will create entry inside of local storage. How to load it? I'm using the same key. So in order, if you pick it from local storage key, it will be a string. In order to convert it into object, you need to parse it. So JSON parse will take a string with encoded object, and it will create object values. Remember, but values, it's an array of numbers. I need to get raw data out of this array numbers. So I'm calling raw data.make raw data for the values. It is static method or factory method of that class. In order to create objects, methods that create object called factory methods. So it is creating raw data object out of the array. So this is how I pick it from the storage. And how do I know if it is saved or not saved? I'm going to local storage get item for the key, and if it is returning me something, it is previously saved. So this is local storage logic. Okay? It is more straightforward than cookies, but it is available only to JavaScript. Okay. Let's continue. Going back to main. I imported raw data class. I imported save, load, and save it. And what is this piece? I remember that this program is displaying data as images. And images by default, images initially they're on the server side, they're not in the browser. I want to avoid flickering images due to delay of retrieving image from the server. Because initially when you run this program first time, all images on the server and browser will create local copies of them, so it doesn't have to ask for image each time. But initially it will be flickering because you ask for image which is not local. In order to avoid flickering, we can preload images. How to preload images in JavaScript? You create an image object and you assign image.source, source property of image object, to location of an image. Assigning source property of an object to location of an image will preload image from the web. So when you refer to this image later, it won't create flickering because image will be local inside of the browser. Since I have several images, I'm doing this in a loop. So I created empty array, and I'm going from 1 to 6 because I know there are 6 of them. I create image, I assign image source, and this function is using template, JavaScript template. In JavaScript template, they're in backwards. So images dice inserted value from the variable, this variable. And when you assign it to the to source property, it will preload it to the browser from web. And I keep pushing this to array of images. Why do I need this array? Because I need to preserve references to the objects. If I don't preserve references to images objects, these image objects, they will be collected by garbage collector and data will be lost. And browser may discard those images locally. Okay. So it is when you preload image, it's important to keep reference to image object. So what is these 3 variables? I declare variables select, dice, and total. Start with $sign. $sign doesn't have any special meaning. It is just a letter inside of JavaScript. Naming convention, if variable is referring to a jQuery object, some programmers start this variable with $sign. It does not enforce it. It is just a choice for some programmers, So later I will do selection from document tree and assign selected objects. It is good to select once, so you don't look for an object each time when you want to update it. So I prefer, in this program, to select objects in the beginning from the document tree, and each time when I update this object, I'm just using variable referring to the object. So I'm not looking for the object and again. So I'm saving runtime. Okay. So what is this part? Document ready. A document ready, it's a feature of jQuery. A jQuery provides it, and what is the behavior of document ready? Document ready receives function as a parameter, this function, and this function will be called when HTML is received by the browser and it is processed into document tree.
Here's what I found.
Okay. When HTML is received by the browser and it is processed into document tree. Why do I need to wait till HTML is processed to the document tree? Because I'm doing selections from document tree down. In order to select from document tree should exist. This is the reason. So I show 3 variants of selections for simple 3 examples. Select by tag. So my index contains tag. It is select, which is drop-down list. So I'm selecting this object. I'm selecting paragraph that has ID dice images. So I have paragraph that has ID dice images. It is a paragraph where I will insert images by JavaScript. Currently it's empty. Next, I select span that has class total number. Dot means it is class, pound means ID, nothing, it means tag name. So this is class of span. So I have a span. Okay, span, class total number. This class makes this 0 orange because I have CSS class that changes this color to orange. Okay. Why do I have 3 kinds of selection? Because it's a learning exercise to show. I could select everything by ID. It would be simpler. Okay. Because it's about learning. This is why. So I did 3 selections and assigned these to 3 variables so I can call properties of this object to update the screen. All right? So what next happens? I'm checking if I have a previously saved data inside of local storage. If it is previously saved, this will be true. So I'm picking raw data from local storage. I'm calling load function to pick the data. So I have raw data. All right. Next, this raw data contains number of dice. Select, it's a tag, this one. And I want to flip it to match number of dice on the screen. So select val will pick number from raw data and flip it to a number matching inside of raw data. So I'm updating this box from local storage. Okay? And I'm calling display raw data for given raw data object. Display raw data for given raw data object, it is updating images on the screen and updating total on the screen. Okay? Are you with me? Okay. Updating images on the screen. What does it do? I have a previously selection of the paragraph of the images. So paragraph will contain images. I call empty, it will empty the paragraph. So previous images will be gone. It will empty that tag. After this, I'm running loop through values of raw data values from every element of the list. I'm constructing name of the image from number in the list. This is how I do it. This is name of the image. And I'm appending this image tag to paragraph of images. So append, and this is template, JavaScript template, so back quotes. Image source, this is the name of the image constructed from index, not index, from number. And this is out to be displayed if image is not showing up. Okay. So this is how images are inserted into paragraph. So next is update total. Right? I have previously selected total, and I'm replacing text content of the total. So this text content of the total, it's a span in my case, to raw data.total. So this is how it's updating screen for that. Okay. So going back to setup. So this is explained, but this is not. Because I need to make this button work. So I need to execute some code when I click on this button. All right? So I need to attach click handler to this button. Right? To this button. So what do I do? It is done inside of this function call. I'm going here, and what it is? I selected roll button by ID, and .click is attaching this function as click handler. So this function will be executed when I click on this button. All right? So what happens inside of this function? This is log. It is calling request log data for the number picked from current selection. If you call select val without parameters, it will give you current value. If you provide parameter, it will flip this box. This is behavior from jQuery. So I didn't provide parameters, so it will pick whatever selected and call request raw data parse int that. Why do I need to parse it? Because all values are inside of inputs, check this drop-down list its input, are strings by default. So I need to convert it into int, right? So I'm calling request raw data for given number. And where is request raw data? It is this function, for given number. So this is where magic happens. This is when JavaScript is actually requesting data from the server. So what happens here? This is just console log. $, it's an object defined by jQuery. It's a jQuery object. And so I call method getJSON. First parameter, it's address of the data. And you already saw that address of the data that is coming, it is api.rollDice. Second object is key value pairs given as a parameters to this address. And in this case, it is only one key value pair, number of dice as a key, and value, it is this number of dice received by this method. And third parameter, it's a function that will be executed when we receive the data. I could define this function outside. In this way, I will use name of the function here. But instead of defining this function outside, I decided to use anonymous function without name and just copy-paste it inside of the code here. Another option, to define some specific function, like fill in data or whatever, and refer to this inside of getJSON. Okay? So this function will be called when data is received from the server. So there is a network delay. So you handle this network delay with callback. So this function is called back when data is received. So what does it do? This function will receive some data object, and this data object is JSON object, this object. So you can refer to content of it as data.values will be this array. Data.total will be this number. Data.number of dice will be this number. So this is how to read it. So I'm creating raw data object from data. Raw data, data.values, data.total, data.number of dice. So I'm creating the log object from the given data object. Okay? I have raw data, and what's next? I need to display it on the screen, and I need to save it into local storage. And this is happening each time, since it is called from onClick. You see, onClick is called request raw data. So clicking on the button is requesting new raw data, and this is request new raw data is updating the screen with received data and updating local storage. Questions? So it's a kind of introduction that is linking data's web services in the next half of the course. With previous course, when we learned about controllers, when we learned about some HTML using templates, but in the second half of the course, we will once in a while we'll use template, but mostly it will be about JavaScript and services serving data. What is specific about it? I use it jQuery because it was a simple example. Unfortunately, jQuery is good for something simple. And if you want to have a fancy example, you will have to write a lot of code yourself. Eventually, you may realize that you are reinventing things that are already available in more serious frameworks like Angular. So for this reason, using jQuery with plain JavaScript is not optimal if we need to have a fancy client with multiple pages, with local storages and all these things. So as introduction demo, yeah, cool, because everything is within one page, right? But if we want to implement like student data separated into two pieces, one, it is data server and client that has multiple pages, it will be absolutely horrific idea if we want to do it using jQuery directly. It will be extremely a lot of work. But it would be mostly reinventing things already available in other frameworks, like Angular, for example. So for this reason, for vast majority of clients, we will use Angular. I'm not using React, although React is a good choice as well, because some of you are taking a course called Web Mobile blah 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 for mobile degree program, and that course is using React. So in order to avoid duplication of the courses, this course is using Angular, not React. And Angular also provides better organization of the code than React. It is actually enforcing good organization of the code. So it's another reason why it's Angular, not React in this course. So this was introduction into second half of the course, and this is it for now. Questions?